Okay, so one of the things we have, two types of nephrons. We have what's termed the cortical, and we have our juxtamedullary. Juxta meaning the placement of, okay? In the cortical, these are the ones I have the majority of, okay? And if I try to look at cortical versus medulla, in a cortical nephron, these are going to be just below the surface of the capsule of the kidney. Oh, is the door shut? Okay. And it's a short nephron, and it only dips very little into the medulla, and then comes back up, and look what it does. It meets a collecting duct. Note that on the cortical nephron, the blood vessels are found around my PCT, my DCT. So everybody notice the blood vessels, okay? So my blood vessel structure is located up in this upper region of the nephron. Is everybody following the blood flow? In my juxtamedullary, there's a difference. There's very little portion in the cortex. The majority of it is in the medulla. And some of them dip very far into that renal pyramid medulla portion. And that vascular structure is now making this really cool structure around my descending, my loop, my ascending. Reasons for that. They will each move different types of material better. One is going to move water a little bit different than the other. One's going to move molecules a little bit different than the other. All right? When you think about the blood flow to the kidneys, the amount of blood making it to the kidneys is actually staggering. All right? And that means there's a ton of fluid, meaning the heart's blood, our blood, okay, which contains a high amount of water. And I don't need all of that being lost in the urine. So one will kind of focus a whole lot on water. Okay? Now, in looking at what's going to happen to the filtrate that got pushed out at that renal corpuscle, at that glomerulus, into the capsule that formed the filtrate, what we're going to say, urine is formed in stages. All right? So if I'm not mistaken, we've got a little video. Just double check here. Let's look at the microscopic, because that's sort of what we've been talking about, the nephron.
The functional filtration unit of the kidney is a microscopic structure called the nephron. Each kidney contains approximately 1.3 million nephrons. Each nephron consists of a renal corpuscle and a renal tubule. The renal corpuscle is a bulbous structure in the renal cortex. consisting of a capillary network called the glomerulus and a surrounding glomerular capsule, also known as Bowman's capsule. Blood vessels enter and exit the renal corpuscle at its vascular pole. The tubular pole is continuous with the renal tubule. The glomerular capsule has two layers. The visceral layer envelops the capillaries of the glomerulus. It is composed of specialized epithelial cells called podocytes, which have multiple interdigitating foot-like processes called pedicels. The parietal layer is a simple squamous epithelium that forms a capsule around the glomerulus. The capsular space lies between these two layers. Water and some solutes of blood plasma pass through a filtration membrane formed by three components of the glomerulus. Small pores in the capillary endothelium called fenestrations, a basement membrane between the endothelium and the podocytes, and narrow spaces called filtration slits between pedicels. The renal tubule is composed of a proximal convoluted tubule, a nephron loop, and a distal convoluted tubule. The extensively coiled proximal convoluted tubule originates at the tubular pole of the renal corpuscle and is continuous with the nephron loop. Each U-shaped nephron loop, also known as the loop of Henle, consists of a descending limb that extends into the medulla and an ascending limb that returns to the cortex. The nephron loop is divided into thick and thin segments. The thick segments are lined with simple cuboidal epithelium, and the thin segments are lined with simple squamous epithelium. Beyond the ascending limb of the nephron loop, the renal tubule coils again to form the distal convoluted tubule. Several distal convoluted tubules drain into collecting ducts that pass through the medulla of the kidney. These merge to form papillary ducts that drain into a minor calyx. As fluid passes through the renal tubule, useful solutes move out of the tubular fluid and return to the blood, and waste products in the blood move into the tubular fluid, ultimately to be excreted in the urine. Two types of nephrons can be identified based on their location within the renal cortex. Cortical nephrons, which account for 85% of the nephrons, have their glomerulus near the periphery of the cortex, and nephron loops in the outer medulla. The remaining nephrons are called juxtamedullary nephrons, because their glomeruli are located at the corticomedullary junction and have relatively long nephron loops that extend deep into the medulla. Blood from interlobular arteries enters the vascular pole of each glomerulus through an afferent arteriole. A juxtaglomerular apparatus is located at the point where the afferent arteriole enters the renal corpuscle. The juxtaglomerular apparatus has three parts: the macula densa, composed of specialized cells of the distal convoluted tubule, modified smooth muscle cells known as juxtaglomerular cells, and extraglomerular mesangial cells. The efferent arteriole from each glomerulus enters a second capillary network. For cortical nephrons, a peritubular capillary network surrounds the proximal and distal convoluted tubules. This capillary network drains into interlobular veins. In contrast, efferent arterioles associated with juxtamedullary nephrons enter capillaries known as the vasa recta that surround the descending and ascending limbs of the nephron loop. From the vasa recta, blood also flows into interlobular veins.
Pretty much what we have talked about at this point, all right? So now we're going to be moving into the urine production, and it's going to occur in stages based upon the structure of the nephron that it's going to pass through. So I haven't watched any of these, so I don't know what they're going to tell us. Okay, so we're just going to find out.
The kidneys are located on either side of the spinal column in the posterior abdominal wall. Adrenal glands sit on top of the kidney. The medullary pyramid and outer cortex compose the renal lobe. Branches of the renal artery supply each renal lobe. The smallest branches of the renal artery, called afferent arterioles, supply the excretory components of the kidney, called nephrons. Each nephron consists of a renal corpuscle and a renal tubule. The first step of urine production, called glomerular filtration, occurs in the renal corpuscle. It consists of a network of capillaries called the glomerulus and Bowman's capsule. The diameter of the afferent arteriole is larger than the efferent arteriole. This size difference produces high pressure within the glomerulus. The pressure forces the smallest substances, such as water, nitrogenous waste, amino acids, glucose, sodium ions, and calcium ions.
Excellent. Okay, so of everything that they just listed right there, does every bit of that need to go out of the body as waste? No. Okay? Because one of the things that happens if you have glucose make its way into the urine that goes out of the body, that's diabetes. Okay? So, you know, we don't want every one of these little pieces that were pushed out to become waste. That's where it's going to become the ability and the job of the rest of the nephron to be able to have an exchange occur. Did y'all see in the previous video where it showed the nephron loop and then a blood vessel and how things were moving and could cross back and forth? This is what's going to happen to help us return stuff.
Out of the blood into Bowman's capsule through tiny spaces in the membrane separating them. Other substances, such as plasma proteins and red blood cells, are too large to pass through the membrane, so they remain in the blood. During the second step of urine production, called tubular reabsorption, the fluid passes through the renal tubule, which consists of the proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. As the fluid passes through the renal tubule, it reabsorbs useful substances into the peritubular capillaries. Specifically, glucose, amino acids, and some sodium and calcium ions are reabsorbed by active transport. The peritubular capillary reabsorbs water through osmosis. The final step of urine production is tubular secretion, which occurs primarily in the distal convoluted tubules. These tubules extract larger nitrogenous wastes, excess hydrogen ions, and excess potassium ions from the peritubular capillaries and secrete them into the tubular fluid. From here, these wastes will continue through the urinary system until they pass out of the body in urine.
Okay, so note that they did not call it urine until it had hit that actual calycy area where it's going to go into the renal pelvis. So keep all that in mind as we talk about this process now. And in looking at this formation, okay, this formation of urine, like I said, it's going to occur in stages, all right? In stage 1, glomerular filtration. That means the blood enters the glomerulus, exits, and in that process, all that stuff, I liked how they had the little colors representing all the different stuff, and then they kind of showed stuff that got pushed out. Okay.